record. We are going to be recording this event. So hi everyone, and welcome to the How I Got This Job Nurse-Midwife event. My name is Betsy Cahill, and I'm the Career Community Advisor for Healthcare and Science at the DePaul Career Center. I'm joined this afternoon by my colleague, Debbie Kaltman. And just to start off by introducing this event series, we started this series last year as a way to bring together young alums and professionals in a variety of science and health-focused careers with students to share information about their career stories, their career journeys, and insight into their current professions. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As I mentioned, we are recording this event and we'll be sharing out a copy of that recording with you. And in terms of the Q&A, we will have a dedicated time for Q&A at the end of the event. At that point, you will be welcome to ask your questions through the chat feature here in Zoom. If you would like to ask your question anonymously, you're welcome to send it directly to Debbie or me, and we are happy to ask it on your behalf. You're also more than welcome to unmute yourself and to ask your questions that way as well. So thanks everyone again for joining us. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Debbie to just give a quick overview of the Career Center and some of our different services and resources available to you.
All right, so quick screen share switch. Okay, so one of the first resources that we want to mention is actually how we found and connected with Jane, today's speaker, and that is through the DePaul Alumni Sharing Knowledge, or ASK network. So this is kind of like LinkedIn, but only for DePaul students and alumni, and the alumni who are on there volunteer their time and their expertise. So anyone can, any current student or alum can sign up for ASK, and you'll sign in with your Campus Connect, and then you can see different resources on here, and you can search for alumni as well. I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. And if you are looking for advice to, as to what to say to alumni or how to connect, how to network, work on your resume, work on your cover letter, prepare for an interview, explore career paths. There are several different ways that you can connect with career advisors and peer career advisors or peer career coaches here at DePaul. On our website, we have this Career Center chat that is available during kind of normal business hours. You can talk to our team and ask some quick questions there. And then you can also schedule in-person, virtual, and phone appointments. You'll schedule them through Handshake, but you can find all of the information, all the links on this page here, which I will also put, oh, thank you, Betsy, put into the chat as well. And we also have resume and LinkedIn profile reviews with our peer career coaches. So you send them through Google Docs, you send them your resume or send them the link to your LinkedIn profile, and then they will write back to you with some feedback. We also have a number of career-related classes, our UIP courses. So these classes allow you to explore different career topics and get course credit. And they are generally 2-credit classes, so they don't add to your tuition. We have our different career management classes that review different topics like designing your future, creating your toolkit, exploring your strengths. And then we also have our UIP 250 classes. So this is when you have an internship and you'll gain experiential learning credit, participate in your internship, and work with other students who are also having internships to kind of learn from those experiences. We also have a fantastic career library that has over 50 different resources and a number of videos. Each one is generally 1 to 2 pages. So we have, like for example, this one here on creating your resume. Should be opening in just a second. There we go. Writing your resume. So if you need some help in doing that. And if not, or you're looking for something else, we again have more than 50 different topics like mastering the video interview, building your career toolkit, making the most of your internship, networking, and so on. Handshake is the platform that we use to post jobs, to schedule appointments. This is what it looks like for me, but what it will look like for you is this. Okay, so it'll look like this for you. And that's at DePaul.joinhandshake.com, putting that into the chat as well. You can learn about different events, how to update your profile, different resources, upcoming events like our technology career fair happening in just a couple weeks, some jobs and internships. Once you fill out your interests and your experiences, it will recommend things for you based on your activity and based on your interests. And we have a couple of ways to stay in touch with our healthcare and science career community. So I'm going to put another link here in the chat. This is to subscribe to our newsletter and opt into our career community. We send this out every other week and we provide a number of resources. We'll share job and internship postings and share videos from all of our events. And then we also have a LinkedIn group. Great way to practice using LinkedIn, be in our LinkedIn group, where we share job and internship opportunities, events, career tips, and more. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn it back over to Betsy.
Great, thanks so much for that really helpful overview, Debbie. At this time, I am very pleased to introduce our speaker for the day, Jane Bradley, who is a 2017 Health Sciences graduate from DePaul and a certified nurse midwife, and will be sharing some information about her career journey with us. So welcome, Jane. To start off, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your time at DePaul in terms of what your academic course looked like, what activities you were involved in off and on campus, and how you kind of explored the healthcare field as an undergraduate.
Yeah, thank you. So I ended up as a health sciences major, but I probably changed my major like 4 or 5 times. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I started school, and knew that I probably wanted to do something healthcare related, but I think I was a political science major for a while. I was all over the place. So when I was at DePaul, once I found my way into health sciences, I think I was a junior. So I took like Gen Chem and Gen Bio as a junior, and finished everything up. And I kind of wanted to remain open. Like I chose the health sciences track because I wanted to be able to apply for nursing school or medical school or public health school, but to be able to have all my prerequisites to kind of go in a number of different directions if I wanted to. And while I was at DePaul, I had several jobs. One of them was in the Career Center. So I worked there for 3 years. And then I also was trying to do stuff to kind of get into like clinical work. So I volunteered at Community Health, which some of you might be familiar with. It's a free health clinic on the, there's one on the south side and one on the west side of Chicago, or at least there was when I was there. And I also became a doula, which is someone who assists people during childbirth. And I worked with Chicago Volunteer Doulas, which is a really wonderful organization in Chicago that helps to provide people who couldn't otherwise pay for doula services with a doula. And that was a really, really wonderful experience for me because I got to work really closely with midwives, and I also got to work really closely with people who were in labor and having babies, and just really be exposed to that world. And that was ultimately what led me to want to go to midwifery school.
Thanks. So that kind of takes us to your decision to go to midwifery school. Can you tell us a little bit about what that application process looked like, what your grad school search looked like?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always tell people about becoming an advanced practice nurse is that it is really hard and overwhelming looking at going to school for that, because there are so many different ways that you can do it. With medical school, there's only one way to do it. You go to medical school, you become a doctor. And I think with nursing school, there's, you can get a bachelor's degree in nursing, you can get an associate's degree in nursing, you can get a master's degree in nursing and work as an RN, or you can get a master's degree in nursing and work as an advanced practice nurse, or you can get a doctorate. There's so many different ways to do it. And I think that can be really overwhelming for people. So when I was looking at it, I knew that I wanted to practice as a nurse midwife. And so that's an advanced practice nurse who has who is a registered nurse, but then also has an advanced nursing degree. And I knew that I wasn't necessarily interested in working as a registered nurse kind of in the in-between. And so I looked for programs where I could come in with a bachelor's degree that was not in nursing and then end up as a nurse midwife. And there's not that many programs that will allow you to do that. And so that really kind of narrowed the number of schools that I applied to. So I think I only applied to maybe 3 or 4 schools. And Vanderbilt was my top choice, and I was accepted there. And so I accepted.
What did the application process look like in terms of the types of materials, and did they have an interview component? What did that kind of admission process look like?
Yeah, it was pretty intense. I had to take the GRE, which I know some schools don't require that and others do. So I took the GRE. There's a lot of just sort of like administrative stuff with having to go through all the prerequisites, and different programs have different prerequisites too. So I had to make sure I was kind of covering my bases for the different programs. I ended up taking some extra classes that I didn't need to graduate because I had to take like a human development class for one of the schools that I was applying to. And then there were lots of essays, there were interviews at all of the schools that I applied to. They were all virtual interviews. None of them were in person. And I think I applied the fall of my senior year, and I heard back from schools in like February and March. So it was kind of a lengthy process.
Got it. And then once you were admitted, tell us about what the grad school experience was like for you.
Yeah, so that was also a pretty intense process, because the way that Vanderbilt's program works, so again, people are coming in with bachelor's degrees in other fields. And so the first 12 months of the program is their registered nursing program. And so you have 12 months to go from starting nursing school to taking the NCLEX, which is the licensing exam for registered nurses. So we spent at least 40 hours a week just in class and in clinical. And that didn't include, all of the time that I had to spend studying. It was very, I explained it as like feeling like I kind of like went into it like a little bit of a time warp when I started that program, because it was so like all encompassing. And it was intense, but I think it was a really positive thing. I came out of that program, I felt completely prepared to take the NCLEX. And they have a super high, maybe like a 98% pass rate on the first try. So I felt super well prepared academically and also clinically. And then I spent the next year and a half doing the midwifery portion of the program. So once I took the NCLEX, became a registered nurse, I jumped right into those 4 semesters. So fall, spring, summer, fall of midwifery school. And midwifery school was interesting because Vanderbilt is in Nashville. The first half of my program was in Nashville. And then after that, it was sort of hybrid. So we would go to clinical placements that were all over the country. I had classmates in Alaska. I had a classmate who was at a military base in Germany. Like, people were all over the place. I did my clinicals in Nashville, in Bowling Green, Kentucky, in Cincinnati, and in Tampa, Florida. So we were kind of all over the place. And we had online class like before COVID, before online class became such a big thing. And then did our clinicals. And that, something that I always tell people who are interested in nursing school is to try to find a program where they will find your clinical sites for you. Because it is extremely competitive and very difficult to find a clinical site if you don't have a school that is doing it for you. So that is also something that I really appreciated about Vanderbilt's program, is that they found all of those clinical sites for me.
Thanks for sharing that. And then what did your process and next steps look like after you completed graduate school?
So I started applying to jobs in my last semester of school, and interviewing, and I probably went to maybe a half dozen on-site interviews. I can't even tell you how many like phone screenings I did. And it was a really interesting process because at this point, you know, when they're hiring clinicians, they want to fly you out. They want to have a realtor show you around town. They really want to make sure that not only you are a good fit for them, but also that the setting and the practice and the location is a good fit for you, because bringing on a new grad clinician is a big investment for them, and they want to make sure that you are going to stay for a little while. So that was a really interesting process. I got an offer from the job that I am working at now, maybe 2 weeks after I graduated, and I accepted that one. So that's kind of how that went.
It's a really interesting thing that you brought up in terms of how I feel like oftentimes we think of interviews as us trying to sell ourselves to the organization, to the, you know, hiring manager and so forth, but it really is a two-way street and an opportunity for us to also gauge how good of a fit that job is for us. And so that's really interesting hearing about some of those other real intentional components that it sounds like a lot of the places built in to kind of give the candidates a sense of like, oh, what would it be like to work here? What would it be like to live in this town and so forth? Because like you said, it is an investment for them as well.
Is Betsy frozen for other people? Okay.
Yes.
Well, something else that I was going to add about that is that there were definitely jobs that I interviewed grad school is very much that like, please, that would be a supportive environment for a new graduate. So.
And then Jane, can you tell us a little bit about your current role? So you talked about the role that you accepted a couple of weeks after you graduated. Tell us a little bit about what that job looks like, what you do on kind of a daily or weekly basis, and how the experience has been so far.
Yeah. So for people who aren't super familiar with what a nurse midwife is, I think, you know, I mentioned that nurse midwives are registered nurses who have a master's degree specifically in nurse midwifery, and nurse midwives care for specifically women throughout their entire lives. So with an emphasis on pregnancy and birth, but then also we do all kinds of well-person care, family planning, primary care, all kinds of good stuff. So I work in what we kind of refer to as like a traditional full scope midwifery job, which means that I both see patients in the office on an outpatient basis, doing, like I was saying, the primary care, pap smears, family planning. I do prenatal care and postpartum care in the office. And then I also work in a hospital where I deliver babies, do immediate postpartum care, manage labors, all of that kind of stuff. So I work 40 hours a week. I work 24 hours a week in the hospital and 16 hours a week in the office.
What would you say are some of your favorite parts of your job?
I love my job. I think getting to be with people while they have babies and become parents and grow their families is such it's just such a cool experience. There's a lot of joy in my job. And there's also a lot of really hard things that people go through. Pregnancy is not easy. And, you know, just being a person in healthcare is not easy. But I think some of my favorite things about my job, other than just getting to be with people while they have babies, is really getting to know people. So we practice something called primary midwifery at my job, which means that when a patient comes in, they have a primary midwife. And so I have a panel of patients that I take care of from the time that they come in until, you know, after they have their baby. And even then, just yesterday, I saw someone in the office who I had taken care of her throughout her pregnancy. And she had her baby in May, and she was just coming in for her annual, and she needed a pap smear. And it's so fun to get to like really know people in that way and build those relationships. So I think that's probably the thing that I love most about my job.
And Kind of related to that, what would you say are some of the challenges that that you experience in your role?
So I think like challenges that midwives face in general vary so much based on where you work. So I live and work in Rhode Island, which is a full practice authority state for nurse midwives. There are nurse, advanced practice nursing is a very political thing sometimes. And so there are states where nurse practitioners and nurse midwives do not have full practice authority, which basically means in Rhode Island, we can work independently. I don't need a physician to oversee what I do. And there are states in which you have, nurse practitioners and nurse midwives have to have a quote unquote supervising physician. I have physicians that I work with every single day, but none of them are my supervisor. So that's something that I think a lot of midwives face, and nurse practitioners and nurse midwives are advocating for everywhere, but it's not something that I specifically have to deal with. I think probably the biggest challenge for me personally has just been the massive learning curve of working in a clinical job. You come out of school and there's no amount of training that can prepare you fully for clinical work. I think my program prepared me as well as it could, but people walk into your office with things that you have never seen before. And I anticipate that that will be happening to me for many years. And you get more familiar with things over time, but there's just so much to know. It's not a bad thing, but it can be challenging.
What have been some of your strategies or tactics to deal with those issues that, come up that maybe you haven't addressed before, or to kind of learn about? I'm sure that there are constantly, new studies coming out that pertain to your work and so forth. How do you kind of navigate through dealing with those new issues and also staying current on the field?
Yeah, we get time and money every year for continuing education. So that is also something to look for in a job. But that is a really helpful thing. And, reading journals, talking to my colleagues. I mean, I think really just like bouncing ideas off of the other midwives that I work with is really helpful. Someone will be like, oh, well, there's this new medication that you can use for this. And then, we look it up together. So providers are looking things up on the internet all the time.
And I guess one more question for you, Jane, and then would love to open it up for other people's questions. There are so many different clinical pathways in healthcare, and we often see students who come into DePaul and, are familiar with pathways like becoming a physician or becoming a nurse. What was it particularly about the nursing field and nurse midwifery that really appealed to you and that you think kind of differentiates it from some of those other clinical pathways?
Yeah. I think midwifery is a really cool, for lack of a better word, career, because we have our own philosophy of care that is grounded in pregnancy and birth being normal parts of life that do not need to be intervened in, that do not need to be medically treated. And midwife means with woman. And so really just that idea of being with people through big parts of their lives, regardless of what that is, whether that's having a baby, whether that's having an abortion, whether that's choosing to start a family or not start a family, or being treated for ovarian cancer. There's so many different things that we are with people through. And I think that is what really drew me to this profession.
For sharing that. This has been really wonderful and insightful, Jane. At this point, I would love to open up the floor for other folks who have questions. And again, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions. You can also send questions through the chat. And if you would like to ask something anonymously, feel free to send your question directly to me or Debbie, and we will be happy to ask it on your behalf.
I actually have 4 questions, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, so can you tell me the difference between the women's health nurse practitioner and midwife? I guess up until now, I always thought the midwife's sole responsibility was to deliver babies. And then the women's health NP was the one that did the like prenatal care, the office visits and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of overlap between what women's health NPs do and what nurse midwives do. And I tend to think, and I do not mean this in a derogatory way at all, but I tend to think of the midwifery scope of care as sort of encompassing the women's health nurse practitioner scope of care and then adding to it. So we do all of the same things that a women's health nurse practitioner would do in the office. And then we also do the intrapartum or the birth, the postpartum, all of that stuff in the hospital. In terms of like, you know, like let's say I decided I was tired of working nights and, you know, babies are born at all hours of the night. So if you want to be a midwife, most people have to work nights. And so if I was tired of working nights, I would be totally eligible to apply for any job as a women's health nurse practitioner.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, how do you feel about like how do you feel about like the job market for like midwife? Like, do you feel it's restricted because like midwife is targeted to a specific population as opposed to other specialties like the adult gero acute care NP or like the family nurse practitioner?
I think that's also a really good question. I think if you wanted like ultimate flexibility in your job, being a family nurse practitioner is like an excellent career opportunity. However, they don't get to deliver babies, and that's something that I really wanted to do. I had no trouble finding a job after graduation. I know some people, so I'm from Iowa. I went to DePaul, obviously, and then I went to Nashville. And when I graduated, I was not location restricted. I said, you know, pretty much I will apply for a job anywhere. My one rule is that I didn't want to move to like absolutely the middle of nowhere. And I had multiple job offers and I'm not saying that to brag on myself, but just to kind of give you an idea of what the job market looked like when I graduated, which was in December of 2019. So I think for people who are flexible in where they want to go, I think there's a lot of opportunities in midwifery, and I wouldn't let that be a reason to hold someone back who actually wants to be a midwife and not an FNP.
Okay, so for like the family nurse practice, so then I think since that like nursing field is very broad, like is it possible for like the family nurse practice to work in a women's clinic, or would like the clinics only hire like a women's health NP or a midwife?
I think it depends on where you are. I think generally women's health practices will want someone who is trained in women's health. So FNPs certainly are trained to do, you know, pelvic exams and pap smears and that kind of thing. Not all of them do that in their practice because some people don't feel comfortable given the training that they had. For example, when I was at Vanderbilt, there's also an FNP program there, and the FNPs learned to do pelvic exams in about 4 hours. Like they had like one lab that was dedicated to that. And the midwives have we had something called pelvic lab, which is where we learned to do pelvic exams. And it took 3 months of us being in class for like 4 hours a week. So, you know, it's not to say that FNPs can't do pelvic exams or that they can't be good at them, but it's a different training model. And so I think places will often prefer someone who has that more advanced training, but there's tons of FNPs who work in women's health and who do prenatal care. They will never do the birth component of it. But certainly I think there's opportunities for FNPs to work in women's health.
Okay, and then my third question is like, since you went directly into nursing school and then your second year was your like NP, did you feel you were like at a disadvantage because you had no like RN experience?
No. Nursing experience can be extremely valuable. I don't think it really made a difference in me getting a job. And I even see that, you know, my practice has hired a couple of midwives since I've joined. And so I've been through the interview process, and I really don't see them using nursing experience as something that they really look at when they're hiring candidates. I think, you know, midwifery is its own profession that is also, it's weird because I'm a nurse midwife, but it is also a profession that's separate from nursing. And so I think that people who work as labor and delivery nurses before they become midwives generally tend to have a slightly more medicalized perspective. Generally, that's not to say all the time, but I am grateful that I just went straight in. I'm happy that I did it the way that I did, but there's also, again, there's so many different ways to do it, and so many different ways to do it right.
Okay, and then my fourth question is, I think you might have touched on this a little. I'm just curious about like the work-life balance. I think you said you're like on call because like for delivering babies, you never know when a baby is gonna be delivered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is something that really varies job to job. So I am not on call for my patients who are due. I am only on call when I am at work, if that makes sense. So like when I'm working my 24 hours a week in the hospital, I am there, and I'm going to be there when anyone comes in labor, regardless if they're my patient from the office or one of the other midwives' patients from the office. So it is very, very rare anymore for there to be practices where you have one midwife or one doctor and they come in when you have your baby, for obvious reasons. Like that's like a very difficult schedule for people to have, very unsustainable. So I have a 40-hour-a-week job. And so when I'm at work, I'm at work. And when I'm not at work, I'm not at work. And it is great. I love having a 40-hour schedule. It is not super common for midwives to have 40-hour schedules. A lot of people work more hours than that. And, you know, there's kind of trade-offs in, you know, for example, I have friends that I went to midwifery school with who will be on call over an entire weekend. So they'll be on call for 72 hours, but they work in practices that are less busy. And so they can go home and they can go to the store and they can, you know, do whatever. And then, you know, as long as they're able to get to the hospital within, you know, 15 minutes or whatever. So some people spend more time being on call, but that doesn't necessarily equate to more time at work, if that makes sense. Whereas I work for a very busy practice. And so when I'm on call, I've never been at home when I'm on call. I think theoretically I could do that, but the opportunity has never presented itself to me. And I like that. I knew that I would like that. And that's something that I looked for when I looked for jobs, is that I didn't want to be on call all the time. I wanted to work somewhere where I could be at work when I'm at work and not work when I'm not at work.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for your questions, Linda.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So I'm actually in nursing school right now at DePaul. I'm sure a lot of us are at DePaul actually. But did you always know that you wanted to be a midwife, or did you actually consider other nursing fields? I don't know exactly how it like fell into your lap or whatnot.
Yeah, I did consider other like nursing fields, and I think other kind of like healthcare roles in general. But once I became a doula, that really was what solidified it for me. Once I really got to be with people who were, well, you know, first of all, being with people as a doula, so like with my clients, but then also seeing, you know, getting to be like up close with the midwives who worked with them, and getting to see what they did very up close was really like affirming for me that that's the route that I wanted to take. I think the other thing that I really like about midwifery, and I guess this goes for many nursing jobs, is nursing is an extremely flexible career. And I would love to be a midwife forever. But if I just want to prescribe birth control from home and work for Pill Club, like I can do that one day. I could become an ICU nurse if I wanted to. And I feel really good having that kind of like security, even though I hope I never use it. But it feels good to have that like very flexible degree.
Lovely. No, that's one of the things. My dad's a counselor in alcohol and rehabilitation, and he's like, Claire, go become a nurse. He goes, you have so many options. Like it's kind of endless, and it's comforting to know that kind of stuff. But yeah, like you said, like you don't want to, you know, have to rely on that.
Yeah.
In regards to figuring out what your master's program was, did you consider the one at DePaul, or did you find that it wasn't, I don't want to say substantial, but you found one, you said in Vanderbilt? Did you compare different ones? Do you recommend one over another?
Yeah, so when I applied for grad school, this was in 2016, so I don't really know what DePaul's program looks like now. But the reason that I didn't apply to it at the time was because when you ended up with a master's degree, you could work as a registered nurse and not as a nurse practitioner. And I wanted a master's degree where I could work as an advanced practice nurse, like as one degree. So again, I don't know what it looks like now, but at the time that wasn't an option. You would have had to like continue on.
No, they've changed it since then. So that's a good
Okay.
thing to know. You graduate with your MSN in 5, so you can you have like a master's in nursing and like teaching and I want to say some clinical work. So
Okay. Yeah.
so that's fun. I'm trying to think. Do you think particular programs train you better than others, I guess? I don't know if that's just like reiterating the question, but
No, I do. I
yeah.
do think that. I think it's kind of like any type of school. I think there's differences in quality, but with nursing, like there are like certain exams that you have to pass and whatever. So that's, I mean, how much can a standardized test tell us? Which is what the NCLEX is. But I think there are differences in the kind of like clinical experiences that people have, and then just kind of like what didactic looks like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question here from Safa. What was the process like to become a doula, and what was the training like?
So there's lots of different ways that you can train as a doula. I did a training through an organization called To Labor, and it was a 40-hour training. So I like went out to the suburbs for a weekend and did doula training. It was like 4 days long, for like long days, like again, 40 hours. So I did that. And then Chicago Volunteer Doulas has kind of like they had like their own application process that you go through and kind of onboarding process. But doula training is really pretty accessible. And there's also different organizations that will like offer free doula training. So there's definitely a lot of options for that. And doulas are also becoming a lot more popular now. So I think there's more opportunities for training and stuff. But I would definitely recommend that to anyone who's interested in becoming a midwife, or even thinks that they're interested in becoming a midwife, because it's really a very good way to be in the room.
I have a question. So I'm just wondering, what is one piece of advice you would tell like nursing school applicants before their interviews? Because I'm in my senior year right now. I'm applying to MSN programs, and I'm kind of anxious about the fact that I don't have many co-curricular activities. Like I'm not in many clubs or things involved with DePaul and medicine. I have a volunteer position at a hospital here in Chicago that I've had about 170 hours with, and that has really been super, super awesome and beneficial to me. But I'm just wondering, like, what sorts of things can I use to kind of counteract the fact that I haven't been able to be involved in co-curricular activities?
I'll preface this by saying that I'm certainly not like a nursing school admissions person, but I really doubt that they care a lot about co-curriculars when you have really solid volunteer experience, especially like a clinical volunteer experience. I remember in my interviews, really most of it was about like why I wanted to do this work, why I wanted to come to the specific programs, like what was it about the program that attracted me there? What was it about midwifery in general? What was it about nursing? And I imagine that like being able to play off of, play up what you learned in your volunteer experience is going to be really beneficial to you.
Thank you very much.
And Rebecca, just a quick note on that. If you are interested in talking about and preparing for your interviews, that's something that the Career Center can help you with too. We do a lot of interview prep in terms of grad school jobs and internship searching and so forth, including just kind of talking through the process of how to prepare and thinking about some of the things that Jane mentioned, like, researching the schools and really talking about, why you're interested in particular programs, as well as actually doing mock and practice interviews. So if that's something that you would be interested in talking with a member of our team about, feel free to reach out. You can schedule appointments through the handshake link that is in the chat.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm in UIP 250 right now with Hillary, and I'm learning so much. And we actually just started talking about like our resume and interview prep. So I'm very much looking forward to getting some more information on that.
Oh, awesome. That sounds great.
This
Yeah,
just came.
Claire.
How has the pandemic affected your job? I think that's a big thing now. So, there's different.
Yeah, it is a big thing now. I started my job in April 2020, so at the very beginning of the pandemic. So I've only had this job during the pandemic. We were kind of talking a little bit before this actually about how, like, I do some telehealth, but really not that much. And I mean, honestly, at this point, it feels very normal. I think the only thing that I still like notice is talking to people about getting vaccinated and what that looks like and how frustrating that can be, and how that really can wear me down at the end of the day. But other than that, like, we don't have a lot of like really restrictive things at the hospital. Like, no one's alone when they're in labor. People can have their doula, they can have their support people with them. There's no visitors to postpartum, which I actually think is better. No one needs to see your baby the first day it's born. And yeah, things have just really just kept chugging along. Lots of people having babies.
It's interesting that you say that, because I remember when I was talking to my older sister, she works at Advocate Children's Hospital here in Oak Lawn, and she mentioned a lot of the parents, how they interact with her staff and stuff. And it's interesting how like the pandemic has affected that, because she graduated back in 2016. So it's interesting seeing the difference in how different people have experienced that. So,
Yeah.
Any other questions? I think we have time for maybe a couple more.
I have a question. If you could go back in time, what would you tell your undergraduate self or your younger graduate self about career planning?
That's a great question. I think honestly, working in the Career Center as an undergrad made me very attuned to making sure that my, like, applications were in line and that my resume was in line and that I updated my resume regularly. And I think those were like things that I took with me into like applying for clinical jobs once I graduated with my master's degree. And I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that I kept my resume updated and that I, had kind of like everything organized in that aspect. So I'm not sure. I don't like good work. You did a good thing.
Yeah, we had a question. What position did you have at the Career Center? You can talk a little more about that.
Oh, I was a peer career advisor, which I've heard is still in existence, but might be called something different now.
So now we have our peer career coaches, and then we also have our career ambassadors. If you are interested in that kind of position, check on the campus job board. We are often hiring for those kinds of roles. Betsy, do you know if we're still hiring for peer career coaches?
That is a good question, but I will put a link to the campus job board site here in the chat so folks can take a look, because we do like periodically throughout the academic year hire for those roles, which in a lot of cases are open to, depending on the exact like profile, are often open to like undergrads and sometimes graduate students as well. And then Jane, I have one other question that I was thinking about. So I feel like we talked a little bit about kind of the graduate admission process and like interviews and so forth. Do you have any tips for our students in terms of how to make them competitive job applicants and how to really succeed and set themselves apart when they're graduating and looking to apply for jobs post-graduation?
I'm sorry, can you say that again, like interview wise or just like the whole application?
Yeah, so anything throughout the application process from, you know, like resume or cover letter, like the application documents through the interview, ways that students can differentiate themselves from other candidates or really stand out and succeed in that kind of whole application and hiring process.
Yeah, I think, you know, an interesting thing about like clinical roles is that in order to apply for the clinical role, like you have to be qualified for it. And so it's a little different than just like applying to jobs where like you might be qualified for it, you know, like, or you might not be, and people have like very different qualifications. Like it's, you know, you have to have these specific qualifications and license or degree, whatever, in order to apply for these jobs. And so I think that people really look for personality in, at least from my perspective, like the way that I was interviewed, and then also watching and participating in interviews at the practice where I work now. People want you to be good with patients. They want you to be a good colleague. They want you, of course, to be competent, but they are trusting that your training and your licensing has made you competent, and they're really looking at like a lot of social skills. And are you personable? Are your patients going to connect with you? Are your colleagues going to connect with you? You know, we're working with doctors and nurses and techs, and you know, a really team-based approach all the time. So are you going to be good at that? And so I think just like solid interview skills are something that can be really helpful to kind of help, you know, quell the anxiety and the nerves so that you can actually let that stuff come across, because it can be hard when you're scared to, you know, show your personality.
Yeah, it's so true. That's really helpful insight. Any final questions that folks have? Yeah, Claire.
As far as experience goes, is there any like particular like volunteering, picking up a job at like Walgreens as a tech? I don't like, you know, that helps with like, you know, building, I guess, that resume that finds you more like attractive for a position.
Yeah. I think really anything where you're going to be building transferable skills is going to be helpful. And whether that's with a paid job or with volunteering, like being in a clinical role where you're working with people, I think is helpful, at least from my own experience. Chicago has lots of good opportunities for like clinical roles, is something that I found to be really helpful when I was an undergrad.
Okay. Do you need to have any like certifications for that? I know I'm back at home to work in like private nursing homes as like a CNA. You didn't necessarily have to be certified if they were like a private institution. So
I'm thinking about, you know, like when I volunteered at community health, there, you don't need to be certified in anything to volunteer there. They, you know, train their volunteers but you're doing really like very basic, like taking people's blood pressure kind of things. And when I worked with the doula organization, of course, I had to be trained as a doula. So that was something that I went through. I think, you know, there's some kinds of like trainings and stuff that can be really worth it to do so that you're eligible for those roles. So I know like also with nursing, like after a certain amount of time in nursing school, most people are eligible to work as a CNA. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, but in like a traditional program, usually like after the first year of nursing school, people can apply for jobs as like a nurse's aide. So
Thank you.
I have another question, if that's okay.
yeah.
For your graduate studies, when you were at Vanderbilt, like how rigorous would you describe the program? Like, were you able to work part-time or were you just like studying?
I had a couple, I worked very, very part-time, like in a job that I got on campus where I did my homework when I was working. And the job was sort of designed for that, you know. I knew a couple people that worked like extremely part-time while we were in school, but it was really intense. It was very rigorous. And I don't know anyone who worked more than like a handful of hours per week when we were in school. And then of course, the nature of midwifery school, like moving around every few months to go to a new clinical site is very not conducive to having a job.
Thank you everyone for those really thoughtful questions. And Jane, huge thank you for joining us today and for sharing your story with us and really, really beneficial insight into the nurse midwifery career path and more. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you everyone for joining us. As we conclude, I'm going to launch a poll. Would love to get your feedback on this event. As I mentioned, this is a regular series that we do. So I'm really excited to get your feedback. And as I mentioned, we have been recording this session. So we'll be sending around a copy of this recording. And just as a reminder, you can find Jane and other amazing DePaul alums in the DePaul Alumni Sharing Knowledge Network. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. And thank you again, Jane.
Thank you all for having me. I hope there's some future midwives in the group.